Hello. I would like to say a few words about JavaScript. JavaScript has a more dominant role in the economy than any other programming language. The language, with all its flaws, is forced down your throat in the job market. Now, unfortunately, the syntax and semantics of JavaScript is a terrible design. JavaScript is a terrible choice for teaching beginners for that reason, but it is what it is. Because it's hooked directly to the web browser, JavaScript is a really good tool for JavaScript is a very powerful tool for JavaScript is a really good tool for querying the current web page content and layout, for asking for information about the current status of the web page. That's querying. And then based upon that, JavaScript is a really good tool for making changes to the web page content and style, the layout, the content and style. JavaScript is a great tool for trying experiments where you modify and manage and control and manipulate the web page. JavaScript is a very good tool for trying the ad hoc experiments for controlling the web page. Another thing I would say is that trying various experiments regarding controlling the web page does not require full mastery of the syntax and semantics of JavaScript. You can try little experiments here and there on different ways of controlling the web page, even though you know a minimum of the JavaScript syntax and semantics, which is much more complicated than it should be because of poor design choices. But if you try to develop a finished product based upon that earlier sequence of experiments, then such mastery of JavaScript is necessary. And like I said, JavaScript is a bad choice for beginners because the design of the JavaScript is so bad. And yet, JavaScript is incredibly powerful, unlike any other programming language, for doing these kinds of things. It is a powerful tool with serious flaws. Now, I want to say something about prototypes. Prototypes have a special meaning in the JavaScript language that they have in no other programming language. JavaScript has a different type of object-oriented design that no other object-oriented language has, and that design involves something called prototypes. Prototypes can be a source of confusion, which I want to quickly cover now. Now, the implementation of prototypes is a lot harder to learn and understand than it should be, because it is what it is. Because they did a poor job in the design and implementation of the JavaScript programming language 25 years ago. But here's what it is. In JavaScript, you have objects. Every object has a prototype. Almost always. Every object has a prototype, which is another object. So every object has a prototype, and this prototype is an object, which means this prototype, since it's an object, also has its own prototype, and so on until you reach the rare case of objects that have no prototypes. But every object in JavaScript has a prototype. An object inherits its methods from its prototype object. Or an object inherits properties, usually methods. This object will inherit properties, which are usually method properties, function properties, from its prototype object. Or it can inherit methods from the prototype object of the prototype object, or so on, in a cascading chain. Because this object here inherits properties from its own prototype object, so it can go on and on. But in general, an object always inherits properties from its prototype object, or the prototype object of its prototype object, or so on. Usually, the properties that inherits are functions, but they can also be simple data values. Well, in Java, but I also should mention something about properties before I explain what the problem is here. In JavaScript, every object has a wide range of properties. And each property is a name and a value, and the value can be a regular data value or a function. So, for example, here I have an object 1, and it can have properties like address, age, gender. So, for example, object 1 dot age 54 years. Could be a number or a string, doesn't matter. So object 1 has this property. Each property is a name and a value. The name of this property is age. The value in this case is a string 54 years. JavaScript is all about objects and objects having properties. And that's basically the core of JavaScript, is you have objects and every object has multiple properties. Sometimes these properties are functions. Often these properties are data values, strings, numbers, and so on, or other objects. Well, so let me explain what the problem is. Let me explain one reason, not the only reason, why prototypes can be a source of confusion for several reasons. This is one. Some objects have a property where the name of the property is prototype, like this. So you do have in JavaScript some objects which do have a property where the name of the property is spelled prototype. And you also have many other objects that have no prototype property. Here's a potential source of confusion. This does not refer to the prototype object of object 1. This is object 1. Object 1 has a property. The name of the property in this case is prototype. This does not refer to the prototype object of object 1. And sometimes teachers and or book writers do not clarify that issue. This is not the prototype object of object 1. Now you might guess that sometimes a property that has this spelling probably refers to some object that is some kind of prototype object. Yes, but not the prototype object of this object. Consider functions. Let's consider functions. In JavaScript, functions are objects basically by definition. You have objects that are not functions, they're just regular objects. You have objects that are functions. So functions in JavaScript by definition are a subcategory of objects. If it's a function, it's also an object. And objects have properties. Function objects usually do have a property with this spelling. Function objects usually do have a prototype property. So this is a function. Function 1, like square root or something like that. Function 1 is a function. It is also an object because every function is an object. And objects usually have some properties. And function 1 is a function object. One of its properties is the prototype property. But it does not mean what you might think it means. This is not the prototype object of this function object. This is a function and a function object. Function 1 is a function and it's a function object. And like any other object, it has a prototype object. But that's not what this is. This is not the prototype object of function 1. Do not be confused. Now what it is this property does refer to an object that is the prototype object of objects that are created in kind of a printing press fashion. You just make one and make another, make another. This is the prototype object of little objects that are created whenever you use this function as a constructor function. Whenever you use this function as a constructor function, you create new little objects, and those new little objects have a prototype object, which is what this refers to. This can be a source of confusion, along with many other limitations, defects in the language that create many other sources of confusion. And there I stop.